here. And the most important thing is that she found Jesus. Jesus found her, and she knows where she's going. So Natalie was raised a Jehovah's Witness and pioneered. The organization had instilled in her an unhealthy fear of God. That might ring a bell with some people. And reading God's Word showed her His love and salvation. So, Natalie, come up and tell us how the Lord has changed your life.
Well, good morning. It's my first time here, first time ever giving a testimony, first time ever public speaking. I didn't even know how to begin. Everyone said do the outline thing, so I did an outline, and my big fear was that I would freeze. And if I froze, then all I could do was read an outline, and it would be done like in 3.5 minutes, so I said I can't do that. So I began typing it out, and I said, well, I don't want to read it, so I said I'll get the yellow highlighter.
Just hold on a second. What do you want me to do with it? I'm sorry. Move the base. You good?
Is that okay? Can you hear me? Oh. You mean like turn this? Is that better? Oop. Can you still hear me? So I went about highlighting everything I wanted to share with you, and by the time I got done, everything ended up yellow, and now I have a yellow testimony, so I don't know what. But I'll do the best I can. Okay. My name is Natalie. Some of you may know me as Gold Morning on the internet. I could have written any number of you. I'm sure you all have your stories. I heard some of them on our opening day. I mean, my heart was broken, and every story is different, but in all the years that I have written ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it evokes the same emotions. We have guilt because we've hurt our families, or we perceive that we've hurt them. We have shame because many of us have been disfellowshipped. A lot of us feel helpless because we can't find the right answers. We're sad because we truly felt we let Jehovah God down. A lot of confusion because we don't know where to go to serve Him anymore. There's pain, terrible pain over family that we've lost. Mostly fear, an awful fear that Armageddon is coming, and that's it. It's done for us. And I don't know about you, but I would say a good decade of my life, every time it thundered and there was a thunderstorm, I would think Armageddon was coming. You know, that's it. I didn't get on the boat, and it was all over. I left in the early 80s, and I'll get into it, but my existence for a good 16 years was like living in a twilight zone. It wasn't a real life. I made pretend I was okay, but I wasn't. And I'm convinced, totally convinced that, 100% convinced, that just getting out, I don't care if you're out 10 years, 20 years, you're not free. You'll make pretend you're free. You'll make pretend you're okay. But those of you that have come to know Jesus and are now Christians, you know what I'm talking about. Once you find Christ, you realize, now I'm okay. I never was. You know what was missing. When I did this, I thought it was going to be so hard to fill up an hour. So when I practiced, I talked to my wall, and I realized, oh my, I have so much yet to say, and I'm almost ready to quick eliminate some things. So I'll have to make the beginning a little bit shorter. I wanted to share with you 2 scriptures from the book of John, chapter 8:30, and then I will get into a little bit of my history. It says, even as Jesus spoke, many put their faith in Him. And He, Jesus, said, if you hold on to my teachings, then you're really my disciples. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I thought I knew the truth, and I'm sure you all did also. We didn't have to do, any of the hard part. They did it all for us, the organization. All you had to do was read, underline your paragraphs, answer the questions, and you had the truth. And after all, we called it the truth, didn't we? How could we not have the truth? And we never thought to question it. They told us we had the truth. But in the same book of John, I don't know where I was, I'm sure you all read this scripture too, Jesus identified explicitly what the truth is. And in chapter 14, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. How clear could that be? But we read it, it didn't click, and I think it didn't because we didn't know Jesus. We only knew the organization. And when you look at scriptures in the Bible, you can take every single scripture that has Jesus is our Savior and take your eraser and erase it and write in Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And that's basically what they did. They replaced Christ. And Satan so deceivingly did that. He's the great deceiver. When you're lied to, you're lied to. Deceiving, no, you don't see it. And that's why he's the great deceiver. History, third generation Jehovah's Witness, sort of. My grandmother became the International Bible Students. I think it was around 1914. She came from the old country, Italy, very Catholic, old school Catholic, the real Catholic superstitions and the whole 9 yards. And it was really something for her to have done that. The family was just astounded. All the relatives that came, they couldn't believe she could leave the Pope. She had 5 children. My youngest, the youngest was my dad. And he had sisters and a brother also. And none of them took to it. And I'm sure that was a huge disappointment for her. His sisters and him would sneak to friends' houses to have Christmas. And, it would break her heart. In her mind, that was the right religion, the right way to worship Jehovah. So my father was a phenomenal musician, and he meets my mother, who was an opera singer. And they had that in common. They dated for a few years, and they married. And my father really was not a Jehovah's Witness, quote. I think he believed in it. How could you not? Once you learn about it, it's like stuck in your head. But he didn't practice being a Jehovah's Witness. And so when they married, my mother was adamant that any children they had would be raised Catholic, baptized Catholic. And it was fine as far as my father was concerned. So there was my brother and I. He's 4 years younger than I. And I only have one memory as a little girl going into a church. I had to be 3 or 4, and I remember this water you kind of put on your head, and I asked my mother what it was, and it was some holy water, and that's about as far as I went with churches. But it backfired on my father. He was in the 1st Army Band in New York City, and then he went to Fredonia State College to become a music teacher. And he graduated, and he got his first teaching job in a little tiny hick town that no one's ever heard of, Gowanda. I think 30 people live there. It's mostly Indian reservations. And I went to school with Tommy Two Guns and Susie Cornflower, and he taught high school there, and everything was fine. And parents were happy at that point. And 2 Jehovah's Witness girls knocked on the door, Wanda and Yolanda. I remember their names. And they studied with my mother. And my mother's mom had just died. And I think she was amazed when they had showed her there was no such thing as purgatory, because my mother was paying a lot of money to priests to have prayers said to make sure that her mother wasn't in a purgatory. And so she trusted them after they proved there was no such thing as that. It's, well, what else? What else was I lied to? So my mother begins to study, probably much to my father's dismay. He didn't want to be involved in it, and here he finally got out, married a Catholic wife, and here she is becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My parents were very lenient with us. I did not have an abused childhood. They were much more lenient than many parents that are Jehovah's Witnesses. In school, I was able to do artwork. So my mother would say, if it's Halloween, draw a pumpkin. Don't make the face. If it's Christmas, draw a green tree. I could have cupcakes during birthday parties. I didn't have to go to the principal's office and be excused. She would say, just thank Jehovah for the food. It's food, and don't celebrate the birthday. I was allowed to be in bands and choirs. Most Jehovah's Witness children aren't, because they play patriotic songs and music. And of course, in the congregation, my father was looked down upon greatly because he was a music teacher, and they expected him to give up his job because he did conduct patriotic songs and, music that had, religious flavor to them. And as I got older, I got to see that my father was a great disappointment to my mom. She wanted him to be a ministerial servant or an elder, just like all the rest of her friends at the Kingdom Hall. And I don't know about your Kingdom Halls, but most of them in Rochester were very cliquey. It was almost like high school. There was the in crowd and, the not so in ones, and everyone striving to be friends and involved with kind of the in crowd. And of course, you wanted to dress like them, be like them. It became evident. High school was the same. I kind of had a preppy crowd of friends. Most of them went on to college. They respected me. They knew my limitations, and they were careful not to hurt my feelings. So if they were all going to a dance club, it was kind of, they'd arrange it without me knowing, even though I knew, but they were just being polite. And I used to witness to them. All my vacations and school were spent vacation pioneering, which later on they changed to auxiliary pioneering, but summers were spent pioneering. In all honesty, I liked the door-to-door. Maybe I was an oddball, most didn't, but I really cared for the people. I didn't like all of the unspoken rules, but I cared for the people. I married young. Most Jehovah's Witness girls did. Most of the conventions, we never sat and listened. You were bored. So we walked the ramps in the convention centers looking for eligible brothers. There wasn't too many. If you didn't marry by 19, you were an old maid. You were shot. By 15, you were really on the ball trying to find somebody. And so basically that was it. I met someone. I was standing up in a wedding, my cousin's wedding, and I met someone that was not a Jehovah's Witness. And my parents allowed me to date him so long as he studied the Bible and attended all the meetings, and of course, he got baptized. I feel bad for him. I don't think I really loved him, but if I didn't marry him, someone else in the congregation would snap him up like that. Then what am I left with? So I married him. And I was engaged at 17, graduated high school at 17, and I was barely 18 when I got married. I had 2 kids before I was old enough to vote, not that we did vote, and I had 3 children by the time I was 25. At that point, I found myself in my mother's same situation. The unfaithful husband that never attended meetings, he was never home. I was ashamed of him. And I lied and did things. I would lie why he wasn't at the meetings, that his employer wouldn't let him off of work. I fudged his time cards because I was ashamed that he never went out in service. When I would do my Watchtower studies, I would even take his Watchtower and underline all the answers. So if someone was sitting next to him, they would think that he, studied his Watchtower. It was all image, total image. I wanted the image that I was married, just like my in-crowd friends at the Kingdom Hall who had husbands that were elders, and I wanted to be like them. But I was getting tired. I had 3 children, 5 meetings a week. They had to be dressed. I had to be dressed, full dress, stockings, shoes, the whole bit. Take them there alone. Our Kingdom Hall they had built it, and they even had like a little room for mothers that was soundproof, so when you beat your kids, nobody heard it. No one knew what was going on, and it was the big competition between all of my friends who had the best well-behaved kids, and I don't think I was too hard on you, was I, Colleen? I didn't beat you too bad, but, I had the 3 kids, so I was wearing thin. I do recall my first seed. I didn't know it at the time. There was a pioneer couple. They had come from another congregation. They weren't with us very long, but they were the exemplary couple. They were in their middle 30s, maybe late 30s. They never married, never had kids, didn't buy a house. She had the perfect book bag for preaching. Everybody had to know where she got that book bag. We all ordered it so that we all had a book bag like her. They were perfection. And one night, Thursday night, after the meeting, you always knew someone was going to really get it, because after everything was done, the elder got up, and it's like, oh, someone's going to get, their head chopped off, and we're all like, who's it going to be? And they announced this couple's name. The whole Kingdom Hall, you heard, you couldn't help it. You couldn't believe that this could happen to this pioneer couple. What could have they done? So the gossip all started after. Why would they be disfellowshipped? They pioneer 24/7. They're at every meeting. He answers 10 questions. They're perfect. So we all speculated it had to be something sexual. I mean, it's got to be wife swapping. I mean, look what's going on in California. Whole congregations are getting, disfellowship for immoral conduct. But it came out, they became born again. It was, it would have been better if they did something else. It was like unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. This couple's perfect. I can't tell you how perfect. And so I wanted to know what it was, but I didn't dare say anything. The big thing is Satan wiggles in. You have to really watch out. If Satan could do this to them, they must have been, listening to these born again people. And I wanted to know, and that was my first. I was too ashamed to ask. I never looked them up to find out why, but it's what could have they heard that I don't know that would make them leave? It was 100% the truth. They weren't stupid. What did they hear? And I think that really was the first seed. I dismissed it. I felt guilty for even questioning what they could have heard. Eventually, I got divorced. David was never home. I can't blame him. How could he be happy? He was always evading meetings. He worked extra when he didn't have to work. I had 3 kids. I did everything from stacking 10 face cords of wood, painting the outside of the house. I might as well have not been married. He was never home. And so we divorced, and I see him. We have talked about this a little bit throughout. He's not a bad person. He had problems. And I had the 3 kids, and here I am single with 3 children, just about falling away. I'm not going to meetings. My mother, who has mental illness, is emotionally distraught that I'm like falling away, her perfect pioneer daughter. And my brother went through the same thing. He graduated from high school, didn't know what to do, and so he went into the pioneer service likewise, went to Bethel for 4 years, came home, he was very nice looking, my brother, kind of like John F. Kennedy Jr., so all the sisters are after him. They're like on him, and he ends up finding a very wealthy sister and got married, and she had children. And at that point, I'm divorced. And I should have mentioned, I did meet somebody, a worldly man. And obviously, my brother, and they knew I was dating. And I just found out last night, God bless my daughter. I was in tears last night. I never knew this. How my brother's family had harassed her to squeal on me. She was a little girl and 9 years old. And so, they got her to admit to my brother that, my mother has this boyfriend, and obviously I didn't live with him. Not that it makes it any better, but, I was with him. And so they started to spy on me. And they had cars out, and then they called me and wanted me to write a letter of resignation. And I told them I would not denounce God. That didn't mean I didn't believe in God, but they wanted it really bad. And they would hound me several times. They would knock on my doors. I remember one summer, the doors are all open in the house, and I saw the car come up. You know how the pins and needles go through your body? Like, oh, it's them. And I hid in my house. I hid. They knocked on the front door. They called my name through windows. We know you're in there. They went to the back door. And I hid between my bed and the wall until they left. So eventually, they opted to disfellowship me. And I'm not going to say I didn't deserve it. I sinned. And I was disfellowshipped. And I don't think it really hit me what it meant until one night. I remember when it happened, too. We were at Friendly's. I was in a restaurant, and it was a Thursday night, and they all walked in. My cousin, all my girlfriends, their husbands, everybody I'd known my whole life. And these are friends that I grew up with. We were in each other's weddings. We threw baby showers for each other. My pioneer partner was there for all those years, and they walked right past me like I didn't exist. And I knew that was the night they had just announced it. A few weeks went by, and it hit me. In a night, it must have been around November. It was a dark, cold, rainy night, and I had gone into J.C. Penney's, and it's not a big mall. Where I lived, it was a little tiny plaza, and it was kind of a ma-pa J.C. Penney's, and I'm shopping, and it's late, and I'm hot and overheated, and I can't find what I want, and they start announcing the store's closing, and I'm quick trying things on in the dressing room, and I can't find it, and I said, that's it, I'm out of here. And I leave, and they're flicking the lights off in the store. You could see the store getting dark, and the security guards by the door letting the last few customers out. And I dropped all these clothes off at the counter. And the security guard opens up the door, and the whole parking lot's dark, and it's drizzly and raining. And I get in the car, and I start it. and the windshield wipers are on, and I can remember those windshield wipers. I don't know why. They were making this noise. Maybe I needed a blade. It was this loud noise, and I looked down, and there was a sweater on my arm, and the tag was on it. And I must have forgot to, dump it at the counter. Well, my first thought was, I see the security guard is still by the door, and, all the store's getting dark, and my first thought was to quick run and tap on the door. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize it was on my arm. And I sat there looking at that sweater, and that's when it hit me, what had happened to me. And from then on, I had panic attacks. I said, why do I return the sweater? I'm dying at Armageddon. It doesn't make any difference. I'm the scum of the earth. I am like the murderers, the thieves. I'm the dog that returned to its own vomit. I know the truth. I've left it. I could keep this sweater. It doesn't make any difference what I do with the sweater. And I didn't return it. I don't remember what happened to the sweater. I don't know if I ever wore it. I'm blank. I don't know what happened with the sweater, but I kept the sweater. It hit me what I was. I started to have nightmares about this airplane taking off and that everybody was on it but me. And I don't know why an airplane, because I had never at that point been on an airplane. But what is ironic, that in my testimony I was born again on an airplane. But I used to have these dreams. All the Jehovah's Witnesses were on this airplane, kind of like the Left Behind thing. And the panic attacks... The panic attacks were getting worse. I could have them over anything. I would see Amish people and have panic attacks. I don't know what the association was. I went to there was a service for someone that died, and this funeral home was an old home restored into one, and I couldn't see the speaker. We're all sitting in this room, and the person sounded like this elder in our congregation, and I felt like I was in a home Bible study, and I would have a panic attack. I mean, they were getting severe. This boyfriend that I had tried to pay for a counselor. The counselor said there was no cure for me. There's no cure for brainwashing. He goes, it's like when someone dies. Decades from now, it'll fade, but it's never going to go away. You'll have to deal with it. And so I made up a game that I was able to do my life. I could disassociate myself from reality. When my mother would be screaming and smashing dishes and calling me the whore of the devil and that I was making her suffer, and I could look at the scenario with my father crying and my mother crazy and condemning me, and it was like I could just look at it from an outside, because I couldn't survive unless I did it. And I could do that with everything throughout almost 20 years of my life. If a movie on TV got too sad, you know how you're ready to blubber and cry? I could just disconnect from reality. I don't know what I would have done if I didn't learn that technique, but it got me through. So I remember ambulances coming to my mother's house. I would drive there. Elders would be there. They used to kind of blame my father, like, what are you doing to your wife? And my father would take it. He was the most loving man. And I hated the hurt in his eyes because he was so protective of me. He knew how hurt I was. Nothing was ever discussed. The whole issue of me being disfellowshipped was swept under the rug. And, it was very typical to have phone calls almost every day in the beginning with my mother screaming, and I would hear things smashing, and I'm suffering because of you, and you're dead, dead, dead. And my mother's name was Natalie too, so she was Big Natalie, I was Little Natalie. And he would say, Little Natalie, just talk to your mother. Just tell your mother you love her. And he'd go, Big Natalie, are you there? Are you on the phone? Now listen to Little Natalie. This went on for years. Just years of her being, and the guilt. I don't know what was worse for me, guilt or fear. I've half dozen one to the other. I don't know. It was awful what put my family through. Well, 16 years are starting to go by, actually more like 14, and it was around 1996. I'm still dating that same guy, and it was evident he was never going to marry me. And I just knew something was missing, and I had the New World Translation in my nightstand all the time. It was just always there. Never touched it, never did anything with it. It was always on my nightstand, and one night I got it out. And I was just reading and crying. I felt so unworthy to even touch that Bible. And this kept going on for a few nights, and I told this person I was dating, who at this point kind of knew a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, seeing what my whole family went through, I told him I was reading the Bible, and he had an absolute fit. He said, there is no place for religion in our relationship. It was going to ruin us. If you're going to do this thing, that's it. Then you're out. I'm not having any religion. And I didn't say anything to him, but I was angry. You're going to tell me what I can read? And I still had my own house. He had his house, so I could always go home and do what I wanted. And I kept reading every night. I couldn't wait to go to bed. And I'm reading things that are so different than what I had been raised to believe my whole life. But at this point, I thought, you have been away so long. I mean, obviously, that's why you're reading it wrong. I mean, that is the faithful and discreet. Who do you think you are? They have the answers. You're just not reading it right anymore. So God put in my path someone that I worked with. He was a new assistant store manager, never discussed religion. I don't know why I did with him, but it came up. And he would talk to me for hours and show me all these scriptures about accepting Jesus. And it's like the words made sense, but it didn't click. You know, you read something and, yeah, I get it, but I didn't feel anything. And he invites me to go to his Calvary Chapel church. He said he'd pay for breakfast. And in the meantime, I had left that guy. I said, that's it. I'm changing my life. I want it right with God. I transferred my job. I put my house up for sale. I told him no more. I'm done. I'm going forward. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know if I'm going back to the Kingdom Hall. I don't know where the answers are, but he will come first. I wanted it right. So I go to Calvary Chapel, and I walk in there, and the first thing I saw when they started the music was some people raise their hands. I grabbed the chair. I was having an out-of-body experience. I'm not kidding. If I wouldn't even look to the left or right. I mean, I'm like this watching how many are. If someone rolled on that floor or something, I would have fainted. They would have carried me out. And I am apologizing to Jehovah. Like, you know, I'm trying here. Just give me a little slack, all right? I walked in a bad place. Get me through it. Just don't let me faint. If someone barks like a dog or something, I'll be polite. I was shaking. I got hot. I was sweating. So Pastor Ray Viola gets up, and he's a phenomenal pastor. I still attend there, actually. I've tried other places, but I'm really edified there. He speaks the truth. Everything is from the Bible. And it was on questions I was having, and I felt like he was making eye-to-eye contact with me during the sermon, and I'm feeling things like I had never felt before. And I'm not talking emotional. I mean, I never had these feelings at the Kingdom Hall ever. You know, maybe a convention, the closing song, you kind of got that team spirit or whatever, but this was like a personal touch I was feeling. So, you know, I left there feeling guiltier than when I went because I liked what was there, and I was kind of there to disprove that this is not for me. I wasn't attending regularly, but I was reading Watchtowers. I was reading Christian books. I'm having big, long discussions with Christians and this went on for a couple years. But the turning point was in 1998. I desperately wanted to belong somewhere and couldn't find a place to belong. And my father got esophageal cancer. They caught it in the early stages. And my mother was probably at the pinnacle of her mental illness. It was very stressful. And my father's bedside room before the surgery, he decided to go for this horrendous surgery that none of us wanted him to do. And it was just jam-packed with all these elders making sure he would not take blood. And this was a very difficult surgery. And they were all there, you know, the tie, the white shirt, cashmere coat, briefcase. They must carry the briefcases 24/7. I have never seen one without a suit in the briefcase, but they're in that hospital room. They really wouldn't talk to me. I would politely get up and leave. You know, one was kind of rude, like, well, don't let us scare you away. I felt very uncomfortable with them. They wouldn't include me in anything. And of course, my brother is very, very involved. He's an attorney for the society. He lives in Paterson, New York. His family's work for the legal department. And, you know, he's on their side. You know, what am I going to do? And my mother was just unbelievable. There's no words to describe what was going on. So my father has the surgery, and it's a disaster. Unbeknownst to the doctors, his spleen was enlarged. They nicked it. He hemorrhaged. He lost almost all of his blood. They had to pump him up with salt water. He was in and out of intensive care. The doctors didn't think he had a stroke from it, but I knew my dad wasn't right. He was having trouble saying words. He was just horrendous fever. They couldn't even reattach all the arteries of his stomach because they had to close him up so fast because he was hemorrhaging. So God willing, I can get through this part, because this is going to show you how you are not free just because you decide to leave. In and out of intensive care, we were visiting him regularly. Don't ask me where all these elders were, because there was not a Jehovah's Witness, elder, or anybody after that surgery. They were only there before to make sure he wouldn't take this blood and what was the latest he could use and not use, and all this and that. But it was late one night, and I had this feeling to go. It had to be 11:30 at night, and he was like in a semi-intensive care at this part. There was like 4 or 5 rooms around a head desk. And just had this feeling to go see him. So I went to the hospital, and they would let us in. They knew us, and it's about 11:30 at night, and I'm sitting by his bed, and he's sleeping, and he opens up his eyes, and he had this way of saying, "Ooh, my girl." He always said that to me, and we used to have deep discussions. I mean, he was a teacher. He liked psychology. We used to like to talk. I was very close with my father, and he was a good man. And he wakes up and sees me, and he wants to talk, and he started talking about Jesus. It was so weird. I mean, we never talk about Jesus as witnesses. Wasn't I a good person like Jesus? And he said to me, I wasn't a very good Jehovah's Witness. He said, I was in the army. I wasn't supposed to do that. I was the music teacher. I wasn't supposed to do that. I missed a lot of meetings. I know I was a disappointment to your mom. But he said, didn't I love like Jesus? He said, I was there for everybody. And he was. I mean, he was the man that went 110%. There was a neighbor across the street that had MS, and they found out about it. And she had a lot of cats and had trouble keeping up with all the cats she had. He would go there daily and feed those cats. He painted her whole house inside because she couldn't care for the cats, and it kind of got urine smelling. He painted her house. He would take care of her cats. He would take the animals to the vet. He would take her to doctors. I mean, this is the kind of person he went above and beyond for people. And I'm saying, yes, Dad, yes. And then he looked at me. I cannot believe I did this. I can't believe I'm going to cry in front of people. He looked at me and he said, I don't want to die. At this point, the doctors had already told me blood would not help him. It was after the fact. But he said, you're my girl and you understand me. And he said, maybe. He said, maybe you could get the doctors and I could get the blood. And he goes, it'd be a secret just between you and I. Nobody would have to know. I had been away from this organization for 16 years, and I couldn't tell my father to do it. And worse, out of selfish reasons, I didn't want to die at Armageddon because I was still hoping there would be some inkling that God could still love me and I would make Armageddon. And I told my dad, I can't do this for you. I mean, what if it did help you and you lived another 5 years? Then when you would die, you would not have the resurrection. And I didn't even know what I was talking about, because here I'm reading all this stuff that there is a heaven. I was questioning everything. I didn't share with him that maybe there was a hope. I didn't even know myself yet. I was fighting it tooth and nail. I was afraid to bring up anything religious anyway, because it always made such a huge turmoil in the family. And it's just the shame of it that Jesus knew that to save my own hide, along with trying to save his, that I couldn't do that for him. And I was the only one he had to confide that in, and I let him down huge. And he died. He had a massive brain hemorrhage that night, and he was like a vegetable. And the next day, he had to put him down like a dog, sign papers to take him off of life support. I mean, there's not a lot of people that can say they're responsible for murder. And it's huge what Jesus forgave me for. So the next day, his surgeon's in surgery all day, and we couldn't sign the papers, and they couldn't take him off of life support till this doctor was out of surgery. And all the witnesses show up again from my mom. There had to be like 15 of them. And there's my 3 children and I together. My youngest daughter, I used to have to go look for her. She would be throwing up in the bathroom. She was so devastated that her grandfather was going to die. Not one of them
walked to the other side of a small room. Thank you. And helped us. Not one said, I'm sorry. Not one gave us a glass of water. Not one did anything. And this Charlie that originally was trying to show me Christ, he said, if you call the store where we work, he said, I already worked it out with the manager that I would drop everything and come for you. And by midday, I couldn't take it anymore. They were just all like helping my mom, and I couldn't handle my grief and the kids and knowing that any time I was going to have to sign these papers for my dad to die. And I don't know how Charlie got there that fast. I called him and he was there, and he was in shock at how cruel they were. He couldn't believe people could be that way. And he stayed with my children and I until it was over. Got through it. So, I can't believe it either. If I wasn't on a quest before, after my father's death, I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. I wanted to know if there was a heaven. I wanted to know about salvation. I wanted to know what I could do for my dad. And I was at it 24/7, trying to find the truth. At that point, I had sold my house, bought a house, and my daughter, Colleen, was a flight attendant, needed a computer. Where was the computer before? I could have saved myself a lot of grief if I had a computer. So she gets the computer, and I'm as green as it comes with the computer, and my son's kind of showing me how to do it, and I typed in Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't even know what a search engine was. He goes, type this in, what you want to know about. Columns, and I start reading. And I'm saying, oh, it can't be right. You could put anything on these computers. This isn't true. But right around that time, I had a friend in Florida. Now, mind you, I'm on my 3rd year of this, trying to get answers, and I'm starting to feel that it's true. God doesn't want me, period. I have really been weeded out. I can't be like everybody else. I was so jealous. Catholics are glad they're Catholics. Protestants are happy they're Protestants. Lutherans are glad they're Lutherans. Jehovah's Witnesses are glad they're Jehovah's Witnesses. Like, why can't I find a place to belong? I don't feel anything, but I want to. And so it was my birthday, October 26th, next week. I'll be 53. And it was on my birthday that I went to Florida. And this friend and I were sitting on the lanai. I don't know where that name comes from. We call them patios and porches, but in Florida it's the lanai. And it's my birthday. There's books out all over the table. And he's saying the same thing as Charlie, the same things as a couple of Christian girls at work, the same scriptures, Yes, I know it, I heard it. But he starts to read something from the book of Genesis. And I said, what did you say? And he goes, no, that's not what I want. He goes, try this scripture. I go, no, you just read a scripture a minute ago. Where'd you get that from? What is it? And it was Genesis 6:6. And it reads, in fact, he had read it to me. The Lord was grieved that he made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Of course, I had my New World Translation, and I had it there at the table, and the New World Translation reads, and Jehovah felt regrets that he had made men in the earth, and he felt hurt in his heart. It was like someone took a dabber, like right in my heart. I don't know why. I didn't until the next day, why that scripture hit me so bad. So the next day is October 27th, 1999. I'm on the airplane. I don't know how much is just fluke or how much God maneuvered. I guess we'll never know. But I'm sitting on this airplane, and I'm squished between two people. And there's a woman on one side and a woman on the other, and she was studying for a pharmaceutical exam. She was a pharmacist, and I'm sitting there, and I want to get my Bible out. But I'm embarrassed, and I don't know why, because I was always bold as a Jehovah's Witness, but I kind of felt funny getting my Bible out. And as the flight's taking off, she goes into her bag and pulls out this book and sticks it on her table, but doesn't read it. She's still studying for her exam, and it was a Christian book. And I go, well, she could put a Christian book there. It's kind of weird she put it out and isn't even reading it, but she could take it out of her bag and put it on her table. I can get my Bible out. So I get my New World Translation out, and I keep thinking of this scripture in Genesis 6:6. And I just open it, and I'm reading anything I had underlined, and it was like clicking, and I started crying, and I didn't want to cry in front of these two women.
And I would do it again, and I would get this same feeling like something's happening here. I don't know what's going on. So I put the Bible away. I just felt like I would make a fool of myself crying with these two women, squished. I get my connecting flight, and the plane was kind of empty. Most of the people were up toward the front, and after it takes off, the flight attendant says to me, it's kind of empty in the back of the plane. Wouldn't you like to sit by yourself, have more leg room? And I said, yeah, gee, thanks. So I took my stuff in the back, and the plane takes off, and I can't wait. I'm all by myself in the back of the plane. And I get my Bible out again, and I keep doing it. And everything underlined was just clicking. I mean, I really had a gasp. I would just go, and I would open it up again and read something else. And then I was on purpose reading the scriptures, showed me about grace, and in Ephesians about working, that we don't do works for ourselves. And it was just hitting me. It was like bolts of lightning going through my body. I can't explain what happened. It just kept happening and happening. I'm going, it's too simple. It's too simple. And it was like, I got it. How could this be so simple? But the scriptures that really hit me, and I'm sure most of you know them, but in Ephesians 2, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not from yourselves. Nothing you're going to do. What are you going to do more than what Jesus did? And if you could have got the job done, why did he come? It was just hitting me. What am I going to do better than what he did? And I'm thinking all those hours, nothing counted, all the door to door. It wasn't better than what he did. And I realized that God had a heart. I was lied to. He never left me. I left him. I hurt his heart just like the people in Noah's day. And I never thought of him having a heart or the possibility that I could have hurt his feelings. I believed he existed, and I didn't like him. He was mean. He was the God exacting exclusive devotion. You never knew where you stood. And I feared him. I had a terrible fear of him. I believed in him. I didn't like him. And here was this scripture that said he hurt and that I hurt him. And I accepted Jesus. I was crying so hard on the airplane, I used my coat as a Kleenex. The whole coat. I mean, I was crying so bad, it was snotted up really bad. In the front of the airplane, this guy, he turns around looking at me, crying hysterically. He probably thought I was coming from a funeral. I cried all the way home. I walked in the house. My 3 kids thought something happened to me. What happened? What happened? And I start telling them what happened. And, of course, they're giving me the eyes like, Mom, you don't need religion. You've been through enough. Why are you doing this? And so that's what happened on the airplane. I was going to share an example that our pastor had spoken to us a while ago. It was such a good illustration, especially for someone that's new on grace. And he gave a story. What if God said, to have salvation, you must swim across the Atlantic Ocean. Get there, you have to swim it. You'll earn your salvation. It's like what we did as witnesses. Some pioneered and put in 75 hours a month. Some did 100, some did 10. We were all at different levels. Even as Christians, we are all different levels. Some do more, some do less. All right, if I jumped into the ocean, I would get the length of a swimming pool. I'd sink. I wouldn't have salvation. But if there was some Navy SEAL, physically fit, he's swimming that ocean. He's 10 miles into it, 20 miles into it, 50 miles into it. And after 50 miles, he sinks. Did either of us attain our goal and have salvation? Did either of us earn it? You need Christ, because to do it is impossible. It's impossible to swim the Atlantic Ocean. You need him to carry you. I just loved that illustration. At that point, I was really going gun-ho on the internet, looking up things, studying. I was angry when I saw the changes in the Bible. Obviously, John 17:3 with the knowledge thing. I remember Acts, where it says he bought the church with his own blood, and they put with his son's blood. The other. You're probably all familiar with these scriptures, and I just felt so deceived at how it was changed. I forgot when I started. You remember when I started? And did they cue you when you're going too long, or?
It was 9. I'm not sure. 9:30. Oh, I have a little bit. I think I have a little bit of time. I was talking to my mother and brother not too long ago, and you figure at this point it's over 20 years. My mother's getting older. She needs help, and she won't let me help her. My brother's in Paterson, New York, and visits just a couple of times a year, and he won't talk to me. And she really needs someone. She's getting on in years. She needs someone, to bring her a little food, take her shopping, and the people at the Kingdom Hall aren't doing anything. So my oldest daughter, Colleen, encouraged my brother, come on, Uncle Pete, you've got to talk to Mom, about your mother. Nothing's set in place for her. There's no elders going there, no sisters from the congregation. She's driving with 2 wheels on the side of the road. She's hitting cars in parking lots. She needs help. So the first thing, I got a double whammy that night. I talked to my mother. I go, Mom, I'm your daughter. I love you. I need to help you. I want nothing from you. She said, you've been disfellowshipped. You never came back to Jehovah's organization. My brother calls that night, more stone throwing through the whole thing. They just don't see it, guys. I don't know how to get them to see it. I kept staying focused with my brother. I mean, it's almost 20 years and we finally talked. And it was the first time religion was ever brought up. And he wants to argue doctrine, and I'm staying focused on Jesus, and I'm reading him all the scriptures. You need Jesus. I said, Peter, how do you even know what rules you have to follow until you know the person that's giving you the salvation and what they want from you? And there's no scripture that he could give me to say there's an organization saving you, and I'm showing him all these scriptures on Jesus. So he kept trying to get off the topic. It bothered him. I think he felt ashamed to say that I needed an organization to save me that would be more than Jesus. So he would get onto doctrine. Well, sis, I'll admit, I would never, I've read about Trinity, but I'll never be able to believe in Trinity. I go, Peter, I'm not talking Trinity right now. I asked you, do I have to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses to survive Armageddon, to be saved, to have everlasting life? Do I? Well, sis, I'll be the first to say many Jehovah's Witnesses probably won't survive Armageddon. And I go, well, yeah, Peter, you're right. A lot of everybody isn't. I didn't ask you that. And it just kept going around the bush. I'm sure Satan tried to get to me and hurt my feelings because right off the bat, he got very eldery-ish and started talking about, my disfellowshipping. And he said, well, do they disfellowship at Calvary Chapel? And I go, well, why would you even ask that? Why would you? Well, I'm telling you, you know what the scriptures say. Now, come on, sis, admit it. You deserve the pain. That you brought that pain on yourself. And it was just over and over. You know what the scriptures say? You should not even eat with one. And it was just unbelievable. I said, all right. I said, Peter, I'll admit it. Okay, I sinned. All right, I'm a sinner just like you. I said, but I sinned. But I did what the Bible said. I said, you believe Jesus forgives sins? Oh, absolutely. And I said, you agree going to a priest to confess your sins is not, oh, no, you confess them to Jehovah. I said, all right. I said, so I did that. I said, I sinned. I realized my wrong. I repented. I came to Jesus. I love him with my whole soul, mind, and heart. I've done everything required of me in the Bible. I said, so why can't I go in a kingdom hall? Why would I sit in the back row and be shunned? If I did what you're saying, you're agreeing with me. And he's like silent, clueless. And I said, so are not these elders taking the place of Christ? Why, to have salvation, would I have to be reinstated? Why would I have to sit in the last row? And why would I have to periodically meet with these elders until they deem me worthy to be a Jehovah's Witness so that I could have salvation again? And he's like blank, and he just keeps getting round and round the bush. And but I remember it was 10 minutes after 12, midnight. And I asked him one last time, and I said, if you're really worried about my salvation and you are not answering me, Peter, I said, do I have to have my name at Brooklyn and their little name as an active publisher? Do I have to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses for God to love me and to have everlasting life? And he whispered, yes. I said, I rest my case. I said, I will believe what Jesus says in the Bible,
before a group of men that are sinners just like me. Goes to Jesus. After all these years, I feel better that, I emphatically made it clear to him where his salvation is, and I truly hope that he can come to Christ. I know that you guys hurt, and I'll quick wrap it up here. I know you're in pain. I have a lot of years behind me, a lot more behind me than in front of me. And sometimes you question why you had to be hurt. We don't have answers to everything, but God took us out of that pit, and it might be for the very reason that we can all reach out to each other like we do here and not to have animosity toward our family. Jesus came with mercy. He came for those not well, and the members of our family that we have in this organization aren't well, and Jesus loved them too. And if there's been hope for us, there is hope for them. Don't give up. Have the love of Christ. And they have a heavy yoke on them. And just kind of forgive them because they do these things and they don't want to. They have to. So thank you for listening. Oh, and my next car is going to be a 2-door car, not 4-door.
Thank you, Natalie. What